Russia is not a great power. This is what we discovered.
This is what was discovered in Ukraine.
But for another reason. It ranks 86th in the world in per capita GDP. It exists instead of industrial goods and the export of primary commodities, and has an army that can't fight. So when we look at all of this, Russia has been living on its reputation. I think the Western Europeans do share the opinion that I have, but they like the lever of regarding Russia as a dangerous great power. By doing that, they create the justification for pulling out from the war. The justification is not built on a military analysis of what's going on. A justification being that they're even less great powers and they want to be left alone to make a living. I understand that. But we really have to redefine great power. I mean, China is sort of a great power. Its economy is falling apart and has been doing so for an extended period of time. Its navy is still bottled up in the South China Sea. They're constantly threatening to invade Taiwan, which they can't because it takes 9 hours to cross the Taiwan Straits, and the United States may use missiles on these boats. And anyway, I mean, if you're going to have an amphibious assault, do it as a secret, not announce it constantly. So we have a very interesting problem. The definition of a great power was the United States and Soviet Union. Russia is not a great power. The Europeans are not great powers, but great power is multidimensional strength, economic strength, political strength, military strength. And they're not that. And the problem here is that the United States is the only country that can wield that type of military force autonomously, has an economy that's the largest in the world. It doesn't want the responsibility because psychologically it has come through a series of wars over the past 20 years that's lost. And it looks at Ukraine and says, is this the next one I'm going to lose? So what has to happen here is those countries that want us involved have to show the path. But the world has changed in the sense that there are other countries have the weight to influence Russia. But whatever the Europeans think, the justification they now have is, well, we can't do anything, they're too powerful. But I think they like that thought. I don't think the Europeans think Russia's a great power. They want to use that as an excuse for not carrying out their responsibilities in NATO. It's too great, it's too dangerous. Look, Russia has one strength, the export of natural gas. I'll remind you of the Arab oil embargo of the 1970s, which was very telling and hurt a great deal and everything, but it did not make Saudi Arabia a great power. Russia's in that position. It's got levers, but not sustainable. The problem that everybody has is they're looking at the Ukrainian battlefield and trying to visualize how does it end. In World War II, we knew how it ends. We didn't know if we could do it, but we knew how it ends. This is a war that we can't really define the end, and that's the problem. Because reasonable statesmen will look at this and say, how does this end? In the 1970s, we argued that the Arabs were now world powers. Russia is a power. It can cut this supply of fuel, cut various other supplies. But at the same time, it cannot achieve a goal against, a third-rate power, Ukraine, and is bogged down close to its border, unable to execute. What I would like to say from this is they'll lose. The problem is that the Russians can afford to stay there for an extended period of time and can't afford to lose, so they can't leave. So we have a problem. So let's divide the world. Among the Europeans, we'll say there are a handful of countries that actually want to see this successfully ended, and many countries that just want it to go away. The United States is committed, can't withdraw, won't withdraw. The question is, does it increase the force in Ukraine? And for that, a strategy is needed. So, Poland here, but what is most disturbing in all of this is that the countries with most at stake in the Intermarium have not mounted a combined defense. They have been divided. And so the issue really here is not the United States. We're cautious, but we're doing it. It's not Europe. They're not going to be there. The issue is the countries that are at stake in the Intermarium sitting by and watching, waiting for somebody else to do it. So this region must take responsibility for its near abroad. And that's a difficult thing to do. So I think the Intermarium needs psychological help. We will bring in psychiatrists to tell them that the opinion of France really doesn't matter. You are sitting here on the border. Your children's lives are at stake. Get yourselves together. So yes, they're giving it, but they're not taking risks. The question is, who's taking risks? Poland is taking risks. Ukraine is obviously taking risks. The Americans are sort of taking risks within a modified framework. But it really doesn't matter what the rest of the Intermarium wants. They are taking risks simply by being there. And this is the idea that if I don't believe I want a risk, then I won't take one. France can afford to not take one. You cannot be a great power without having an economy. The area from the Baltics down to Romania is about 84 million people, not a trivial amount. It has the possibility of being a serious economy. China has now reached a point that the United States reached with the Great Depression, that Japan reached with the economic crisis, and now it has built for 40 years an economy, and after 40 years you are going to have a business cycle, and it's down. So the question in the world is, where is the next low-cost exporter of goods? And I believe it's the Intermedium. The Intermedium has low wages, extremely educated people, entrepreneurial in nature. It has two problems. Governments that think they're businessmen are getting involved in it, and the EU. It is almost impossible to be entrepreneurial under the regulations of the EU. The EU was built for large, mature economies. Developing economies, such as exist in the Intermedium, are not considered the key thing. You need to have the ability to take investment easily. You need to have the ability to sell to many markets without rules. And you need to have less rules and everything else. My view of the Intermedium is not, it started as simply a military alliance. It's now changed to something in addition to that because of China's decline. Where in the world? There's always some place. Where is it? I don't know of any other place but Eastern Europe. From my point of view, the EU is an unsustainable entity. Even Italy can't live within the foundations of it. But it is a wonderful way for Northwest Europe to control export markets and send it. Germany exports 1/2 of its GDP. It's an enormous amount. It must have the European market under its control. But the point is that Eastern Europe should be selling the same things cheaper than the Germans can. And they can't do that within the EU. So the EU was created to create a European identity. There is no European identity. There are Hungarians, there are Poles, there's no identity. But there's a common interest, which is different. So my view here is that Poland, as the largest country, in some ways the most advanced economically, must take the lead, not by having a government program, but by our businessmen buying the businesses down in Bulgaria and building on them. So this is possibly a fantasy, but no one believed in 40 years ago that China could ever amount to anything. No one believed after World War II that Japan could amount to anything. And after the Civil War, certainly the United States couldn't amount to anything. So you look for a region that is almost failed and has very little hope, and everybody doesn't believe in it. If you lose in Ukraine, Poland will still be here. So we can make this an existential event. It's a very serious event, and victory is possible. But as I said, we have to consider bad cases. Poland still has to build its future. And what I'm arguing is that the Intermedium has never come together because it's only a system of risk. It's only a system of getting in war. It should be a system of growth. It should be a system of economic possibility. And the fact that everybody laughs at the idea puts it in common with all the ones that succeeded. I don't agree Ukraine is critical. I do not agree that it's existential for Poland. In any country, you want to build the economy and you want to be safe. For that, you need a military and an economy. So this is not a radical idea of doing it. China grew up as both a military power and an economic power. What I am saying is that Europe is so diverse, so different, so many different parts, that the idea that one size fits all, is an illusion. And we've seen this on the military side, where we can't get a single coherent response. And you see it on the economic side, when Germany is desperately exporting into Eastern Europe, which in turn can't compete right now for it. So, yeah, it's always economic, and it's always political, and it's always military.